She went in to clean and saw a crying baby, when the millionaire saw his son calm. He changed. Emily Carter tightened the strap of her bag and stepped out of the rideshare vehicle, eyes scanning the vast, vine-covered gates of the Blake estate. The morning air was crisp, a quiet contrast to the buzz of thoughts in her mind. At 29, recently divorced and juggling two jobs, she wasn't new to cleaning houses, but this was the first time she'd been sent to a mansion in the heart of Los Angeles's most exclusive neighborhood. The structure in front of her wasn't just large, it was imposing, like something from a modern fairy tale where the prince had traded in his sword for a stock portfolio. The agency had been vague on the details. High-profile client, very private, was all they said. But Emily needed the money. Her sister Jenna had just lost her job, and rent wasn't going to pay itself. So she nodded, took the address, and showed up right on time, 7 o'clock in the morning. The gates opened remotely as she approached. No one came to greet her at the door. She rang the bell once, then twice, and just as she considered knocking, the door creaked open on its own. She hesitated. "Hello?" she called out softly. No answer. Inside, the house was immaculate, marble floors, sweeping staircases, and walls adorned with minimalist art. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of citrus and something sterile, like a hotel lobby. Emily stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Her shoes clicked softly against the floor as she ventured deeper, the cleaning supplies in her tote bag shifting with each step. There was no sign of the homeowner, Nathaniel Blake, though she recognized him from tech articles and business magazines. The man was a billionaire before 30, known for his cold demeanor and preference for algorithms over human interaction. Still, she expected at least a note, a list, something. But there was nothing, only silence. She moved to the kitchen first. Stainless steel surfaces gleamed, untouched. The sink was dry. The fridge was stocked but organized like a showroom. Everything was too clean, too still. Emily got to work, wiping surfaces, checking drawers for dust, polishing fixtures that already shined. It was nearly 8 o'clock in the morning when she heard it, a soft, muffled cry. She froze, cloth in hand, ears straining. It was faint, but unmistakable. A baby. Emily hesitated. The agency hadn't mentioned a child. She listened again. The crying grew louder, more urgent. It was coming from upstairs. With caution, she ascended the wide staircase, her footsteps light. The hallway above was lined with closed doors. The crying was clearer now, raw and rhythmic. She followed the sound to a white door slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Inside, a large nursery bathed in pale morning light. A crib stood in the center. And there, red-faced and wailing, was a baby boy. No nanny, no parent, just him. Emily's instincts kicked in. She rushed to the crib and gently lifted the baby into her arms. "It's okay," she whispered, bouncing him gently. "You're not alone." "Shoo." He clung to her, tiny fists grasping at her collar as she moved around the room, humming softly. Slowly, his cries subsided. She checked his diaper, his temperature. He seemed healthy, just distressed. After a few more minutes of soft singing and swaying, he drifted off in her arms, breathing softly against her shoulder. Unsure what to do next, Emily made her way downstairs, baby still asleep in her arms. As she reached the base of the stairs, a figure appeared at the end of the hallway. Nathaniel Blake. Tall, sharply dressed in dark slacks and a pale shirt, he stood perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the Baby. His features, often cold and impassive in photos, now showed something else: surprise, confusion, and something almost vulnerable. Emily froze, unsure whether to explain herself or put the baby down. But Nate said nothing. His eyes remained locked on the child, his son, now sleeping peacefully. The silence stretched long. Finally, he spoke, voice low and even. "He never sleeps like that. Ever." Emily didn't answer. She simply cradled the baby a little closer. Nate looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. His expression softened, if only for a moment. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into one of the back rooms. Emily stood in the hallway, heart racing, holding a baby she had no business comforting in a home that didn't feel like one. But something had shifted. And she felt it. Emily returned to her tasks, though her thoughts remained far from the kitchen counters. She was now wiping for the second time. The image of the baby boy, tiny and helpless in her arms, lingered. She had not expected to find a child, especially one so small, left completely alone in a room as cold and silent as the rest of the mansion. It was as if he existed in a separate world. Within the house, a world no one wanted to acknowledge. The baby had clung to her like he had not felt warmth or presence in days. And the way he had calmed, his tiny body relaxing, his breathing syncing with hers, left a strange weight in her chest. The house, now that she was truly listening, was unnaturally quiet. Not just peaceful or still, but devoid of life. No television murmuring in the background, no faint chatter of staff, not even the creak of pipes or footsteps. Just an enormous space filled with absence. She tried to shake it off and moved to the formal dining room, dusting the already polished surfaces and straightening chairs that hadn't been touched. The chandelier overhead glistened with excess, each crystal catching the sunlight like frozen drops of water. There was no sign that this room had ever hosted a meal, no marks of life, no misplaced silverware or forgotten glass. A low hum echoed from the upper floor again, not crying this time, but a soft coo. Emily glanced at the clock. Barely half an hour had passed since she had comforted the baby. She set her cloth aside, wiped her hands, and made her way back upstairs. The nursery door remained open, the room unchanged. But now Leo lay awake in the crib, his small eyes wide, fixated on the ceiling. Emily stepped inside, and his gaze shifted instantly to her. He reached toward her with both hands, no words, just need. She hesitated, then crossed the room and lifted him once more. He was lighter than she expected, and when she held him, he didn't cry, he merely rested his head on her shoulder, as though he had found something familiar in her scent, her arms, her presence. She sat with him in the rocking chair by the window, and for a while, said nothing. The room was bare but functional: crib, dresser, a shelf of untouched toys, all arranged with clinical precision. There were no decorations, no soft colors, no pictures. Leo nestled closer. Emily whispered to him gently, random words strung together just for the sake of rhythm. She told him he was safe, that someone was here. He didn't respond, of course, but his breathing told her everything. He was listening. He felt it. From the hallway, she heard movement, steps approaching with purpose. She stood quickly, adjusting Leo in her arms. Nathaniel appeared at the doorway, brows slightly raised, though his face remained unreadable. His eyes went from Emily to his son, and again, something flickered in them. Not irritation, not confusion, something quieter. "I didn't expect you to go upstairs," he said, his voice steady but low. I heard him crying. Emily replied, holding Leo protectively but with calm. He was alone. He usually is. Emily blinked. He shouldn't be. Nate stepped into the room, hands in his pockets, gaze now fixed on Leo. Weak. Said she needed a break. I haven't replaced her yet. The nanny quit last. Emily didn't respond immediately. She shifted Leo in her arms, who now stared curiously at his father. I'm not a babysitter, she said carefully, not wanting to overstep but unwilling to stay silent. Came to clean. I know. Nate answered. You can put him down. But Leo clung tighter to Emily's shirt, and when she tried to lower him toward the crib, he whimpered softly. She paused. He doesn't want me. Nate added, almost as an afterthought. Enough to. He doesn't know me well. Emily looked at the man standing before her. He was well-groomed, composed, the image of success. But his words landed with quiet devastation. She saw it, not just in Leo's resistance, but in Nate's acceptance of it. He wasn't angry, just distant. As though he had already decided. This was how things were meant to be. She didn't reply. Instead, she sat back in the rocking chair with Leo still in her arms. Nate remained standing, watching in silence. After a while, he turned and left the room. Later that afternoon, Emily resumed cleaning. But her attention kept drifting. She saw signs of disconnection everywhere, rooms too neat, closets too full of untouched clothes, a fridge with no trace of personal preference. The house was a shrine to efficiency, but completely devoid of warmth. There were only 2 photos on display, both of Nate alone at different tech conferences. None of Leo. None of anyone else. By the end of her shift, Emily had only cleaned half the house. She found herself walking past the nursery one last time before heading out. Leo was asleep now, this time in his crib. She watched him for a moment, tiny hands curled by his face. Then she closed the door gently and made her way downstairs. Nate was in the living room, seated in front of a laptop but not typing. He looked up as she approached. I didn't mean to interfere, Emily said quickly, unsure why she felt the need to explain. He nodded once. You didn't. An awkward pause followed. Then Nate asked. You'll be back tomorrow? Emily hesitated. If you want me to be. He nodded again. Same time. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, he added. Thank you. For earlier. She paused, looked back. He's just a baby. He needs someone. Nate said nothing more. Emily stepped out into the evening light, the door closing behind her. She walked down the driveway slowly, the sounds of the city returning to her ears. The baby's eyes, his fingers gripping her shirt, his calm breathing, they all stayed with her. She had come to clean. But something had already changed. The next morning, Emily arrived earlier than usual. Something about the previous day had unsettled her, but not in a way she could easily explain. It wasn't just the mansion's cold silence, or the baby's lonely cries, it was the brief moment when she had seen a flicker of emotion in Nathaniel Blake's eyes. Something human had peeked through the carefully guarded shell. She hadn't expected to see it again. As she approached the front door, it opened before she could knock. Nate stood there, not dressed in his usual business attire, but in a plain gray sweater and dark jeans. The change was subtle, but striking. He looked less like the image the world knew and more like a man who had Forgotten what day it was. Come in. He said simply, stepping aside. Emily nodded and entered, her cleaning tote hanging loosely at her side. The air inside was the same as before, cool, quiet, efficient. But today, there was a lingering trace of something else. Like the house had exhaled slightly overnight. Before she could ask where to begin, Nate gestured toward the living room. I want to discuss with you, he said. There's something. She followed him in and sat cautiously on the edge of a sleek leather couch, unsure of what was coming. He remained standing, pacing slightly as if trying to decide how to phrase what he was about to say. I know yesterday was not part of your job description. He began. Responded to you in a way he doesn't with anyone else. I also know that Leo. Emily listened, careful not to interrupt. My previous nanny left on short notice. She was supposed to stay until I found someone new. But she walked out. Since then, it's been complicated. Emily folded her hands in her lap. I can understand that. Nate stopped pacing and looked directly at her. I'd like to offer you a permanent position. Not just cleaning. I want to hire you as part-time nanny as well. The room went still. Emily blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the offer. Emily's instinct was to decline. This wasn't what she had signed up for. She wasn't trained as a nanny. She hadn't even expected to hold a baby when she arrived yesterday. And yet, I don't know if that's a good idea, she said slowly. Was there? That's all. I'm not a professional caregiver. You were calm. He felt it. That's more than I can say for anyone else who's walked through this house. Emily searched his face, trying to read whether this was desperation or simply logic. Maybe both. If I accept, she said cautiously. My priority is still the cleaning. I won't neglect my duties. I can help with Leo in emergencies, but I can't be a full-time babysitter. He nodded, as if he had expected that. Fair enough. And I want it to be clear that this is temporary, she added. Until you find someone qualified. Again, Nate nodded. Understood. The conversation ended there. There were no contracts signed, no handshakes. It was just a quiet agreement sealed by necessity more than trust. That afternoon, Emily resumed her usual tasks, moving through the house with more awareness than before. Now she wasn't just cleaning, she was observing, preparing. She kept one ear tuned for any sound from upstairs. It didn't take long. Leo's cry came around midday, short and sharp like a sudden gust of wind. She set down her duster and made her way upstairs. This time, when she entered the nursery, he reached for her immediately. She lifted him, and again he quieted. She sat with him, speaking in soft tones, running her fingers gently through his fine hair. His breathing slowed, and she felt the weight of his small body melt into her shoulder. Nathaniel didn't come to check. There were no nannies, no nurses, no interruptions. It was just her and the child, wrapped in a kind of silence that no longer felt hostile, but sad. Later, while cleaning the study, Emily noticed something strange. One of the drawers of Nate's desk was slightly open, a sharp contrast to the house's meticulous order. She didn't touch it, but the image stayed in her mind, a loose thread in an otherwise tightly woven pattern. By late afternoon, Nate emerged from his office. He paused when he saw her with Leo in the kitchen, gently feeding him from a small bottle she had prepared when she noticed he hadn't eaten. Nate watched quietly for a moment before speaking. I didn't expect this, he said. Emily turned her head, eyebrows slightly raised. Expect what? That someone could just step in. And he would let them. Emily offered a faint smile. Maybe he's just tired of being alone. Nate looked down, almost embarrassed by the truth in her words. Aren't we all? He left the kitchen before she could respond. The baby finished the bottle and let out a tiny sigh. Emily looked down at him, wondering what kind of world he had been born into, a world of silence, of absence, of inherited pain. When she left that evening, Nate was nowhere in sight. The house seemed less imposing. Somehow, but no less heavy. As Emily walked down the driveway, the sky above dimming into a pale violet, she realized something had shifted. Not just in her role at the mansion, but in herself. She had crossed an invisible line. And though she told herself this was temporary, part of her knew nothing about this felt temporary anymore. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Emily arrived each morning just before 7 o'clock, always met by the same silence that now felt familiar, if not exactly welcoming. Nathaniel rarely greeted her beyond a nod, and their conversations remained brief and precise. Still, her role inside the mansion had shifted in ways that could no longer be ignored. Cleaning was now only part of her day. More often than not, she found herself rocking Leo to sleep, preparing bottles, and soothing his restlessness with whispered songs and soft touch. Leo, in turn, clung to her presence like a lifeline. His crying lessened, but only when she was near. His eyes searched for her constantly. He smiled when she entered the room, a rare, fragile thing that felt like a reward given freely to no one else. The weight of that trust settled deep in her chest. It didn't take long for Emily to realize how little time Nate spent with his son. Most mornings, he vanished into his office before Leo was awake and emerged only after dusk, if at all. Meals were delivered to his door, and no footsteps echoed down the hallway from the nursery to his private wing. Leo's world was contained within 4 walls, and Emily had become its center. The house, though pristine, seemed colder the longer she stayed. She began to notice the signs of absence: empty vases, untouched furniture, entire rooms that felt like museum displays, rather than spaces meant for living. The kitchen pantry was overstocked but full of packaged goods, items no one seemed to eat. There was a faint layer of dust on bookshelves that no one had opened in years, and even the fireplace bore no signs of ever having been lit. She searched for pictures. There were so few. One in the hallway, Nathaniel shaking hands with another executive in a blurred gala setting. Another in the study, him alone, standing behind a podium. But none of Leo. None of a woman who might have once shared this space. It struck her one morning, as she fed Leo his bottle by the nursery window, that the mansion was not a home. It was a structure, a shelter, a vault. Everything inside it was designed to isolate, to compartmentalize. It was too quiet, not from peace, but from neglect. A silence, chosen and enforced. She tried, once, to bring it up. It was late afternoon. Leo had fallen asleep on her chest after a bout of fussing, and she sat with him in the living room, lights dimmed and shadows growing long across the marble floor. Nate entered without announcement, pausing when he saw them together. He went down easily. Emily said, her voice gentle. Nate nodded, standing by the threshold, unsure whether to enter. She looked at him for a moment, then spoke. He seems really alone when I'm not here. His expression changed, subtly. A flicker behind his eyes. Not anger, defense. He has everything he needs. He replied. Emily shifted Leo slightly but kept her tone even. Everything except presents. Nate stiffened. I work. I provide. That's more than most can say. I know. She answered. He feels. But he doesn't understand that yet. He only knows what he sees. What? For a heartbeat, she thought he might respond with something cold or dismissive. But instead, he said nothing. He simply turned and left the room, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by the same silence that always followed him. Emily didn't mention it again. But her thoughts lingered. Why was Leo alone so often? Why? Were there no signs of a mother's touch, no photographs, no soft decorations in his room? Why? Did Nate keep himself so hidden away? The question took deeper root one morning as she cleaned one of the guest bedrooms on the second floor. It was a room clearly unused, the bed made with crisp linen, the surfaces spotless. But while dusting the vanity, she accidentally nudged a drawer partially open. Inside were hair ties, an old lipstick tube, and a small bottle of perfume, items no longer in use, but not yet discarded. A presence that had once been here. She paused, hand hovering over the drawer, unsure whether to close it or look deeper. Curiosity. 1. Inside the drawer, beneath the cosmetic items, was a folded piece of paper. Not a letter, but a receipt from a children's clothing boutique. A name she didn't recognize was scrawled at the top, Clara. Emily folded it back and closed the drawer, heart thudding. She didn't know who Clara was, but something inside her shifted at the name. It wasn't hers to investigate, and yet the house offered no answers, only pieces. That afternoon, Leo cried more than usual. He refused his bottle, squirmed in her arms, and pushed away the toys he normally favored. Emily paced the nursery with him, singing softly, rubbing his back. She checked his temperature, his diaper, everything. But nothing soothed him. Finally, she sat down, holding him tightly. "What's wrong, little one?" she whispered. He didn't answer, of course. But when he finally calmed, curling against her chest with a long sigh, she felt the weight of his loneliness as if it were her own. The day ended in silence. Nate never appeared. Emily left the house in the fading light, her footsteps echoing on the stone steps. Behind her, the mansion stood as still and stoic as ever. She didn't know what secrets it held. But she knew this much: no child should have to fill a space that vast with only his cries. The rain began in the early hours of the morning, a soft, steady rhythm that drummed against the car's roof as Emily pulled into the driveway. The Blake mansion stood as unchanging as ever, its tall windows catching slivers of gray light from the overcast sky. She stepped out with her coat drawn tightly around her, greeted only by the sound of her own footsteps on the stone path. Inside, the warmth of the foyer did little to ease the chill that had settled in her bones. The silence was deeper today, somehow heavier. As she removed her coat and tucked her bag beside the entryway, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, not in a dramatic sense, but in the quiet way a thought waits to be uncovered. Leo was still asleep when she checked on him, his small figure curled beneath a soft blanket. She lingered for a moment, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, the peaceful expression that only came when dreams replaced the stillness of his waking world. With the nursery calm, she turned her attention to cleaning. Today, she began in a part of the house she hadn't touched yet, the study at the end of the west wing, a room filled with books and dark wood, slightly dustier than the rest of the mansion. Nate had never mentioned it, but the agency's original floor plan had listed it as a private library. She assumed he didn't use it much. She entered the room cautiously, as if unsure whether she was meant to be there. The air inside was stale, not unpleasant, but untouched. The curtains were drawn halfway, casting stripes of muted light across the desk and shelves. Emily moved quietly, her cloth catching on the corners of furniture, her hands steady as she wiped down surfaces. Most of the books were volumes on business strategy, computer science, economics. One shelf held a few novels, their spines worn and titles faded. She made her way to a small writing desk in the corner, older than the rest of the furniture, carved with delicate patterns along its edges. It was slightly crooked, one leg shorter than the others. The drawers were shut but not locked. She opened the top one and found only pens and blank stationery. The second held envelopes, a few unused stamps, and a faded leather-bound journal with no name on it. She didn't touch the journal. But it was the third drawer that stopped her. Inside lay a photograph, loose among a few old documents and a silver key with no label. The picture was unframed, but well kept. It showed a woman with warm eyes and dark hair tied back in a casual braid, holding a newborn in her arms. She was smiling, not the kind of smile you pose for, but the kind that happens when you forget there's a camera. The baby in her arms had the same wide eyes as Leo, the same soft curve of the cheek. Emily turned the photo over. Written in neat handwriting on the back was a single line, "Clara. Forever with us." She stared at the name. Clara. The same name she had seen on the receipt. The name she had never heard Nate say. Carefully, she returned the photo to the drawer and closed it. For the rest of the morning, she moved through her tasks with a weight on her chest. Clara wasn't just a name. She was real. She had held Leo. She had been here. And now, she was not. But no one had spoken of her. There were no visible traces of her in the nursery, no belongings left in the shared spaces. Only in hidden drawers, tucked behind closed doors, did she remain. Later, in the hallway outside Nate's office, Emily paused. She considered knocking, considered asking. But the silence on the other side told her it was not the moment. He didn't want to be asked. He didn't want to remember. In the afternoon, Leo woke cranky and restless. Emily held him as he cried, his small fists pounding gently against her shoulder. He seemed inconsolable for nearly half an hour, refusing his bottle, pushing away toys, even biting the corner of the blanket she offered him. Eventually, he quieted. She walked with him through the halls, humming softly, her voice the only sound in the house. He rested his head against her chest again, and in the stillness, she whispered without thinking. She loved you, you know. I can see it in her face. She didn't expect a response. But she needed to say it aloud. When Nate emerged later, his eyes looked tired. Not from lack of sleep, but from something deeper. He watched Leo in her arms and said nothing for a long time. I found a photo, Emily said gently. In the old desk. Nate's jaw tightened. He didn't ask which one. I wasn't looking for anything, she added. It was just there. He nodded slowly. She loved that desk. It was hers. Emily waited, unsure if he would say more. He didn't. I'm sorry, she said finally. I don't talk about her, he said. Not because I forgot, but because I can't. Emily understood. She looked down at Leo, now drifting into sleep again. She's still here, she said quietly. Nate didn't answer. But for the first time, he didn't turn away either. That night, as she left the mansion, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet earth and Something else, something tender and nearly invisible. She walked slower than usual, the image of Clara's smile still vivid in her mind. Some grief built walls. Others left trails. And now Emily had found one. The sky was pale with the first light of afternoon when Emily noticed something was wrong. Leo, who normally brightened at the sight of her and reached for her with eager little arms, barely stirred when she entered the nursery. His cheeks were flushed, and his forehead was damp with sweat. He whimpered softly in his crib, not crying, but making a low, strained sound that prickled every nerve in Emily's body. She leaned over, gently placing the back of her hand against his forehead. The heat was unmistakable. Panic stirred in her chest, but she moved with purpose. She lifted him carefully, speaking softly even as her pulse quickened. He didn't resist, only rested heavily against her shoulder. In the kitchen, she searched the cabinets for a thermometer. There was one in a drawer beside a stack of manuals and unopened baby gadgets. She turned it on and checked Leo's temperature. 102 degrees. High, but not yet terrifying. Still, something in the way he looked, eyes unfocused, body too limp, sent a jolt through her. She picked up her phone and called Nate. Straight to voicemail. She called again. Nothing. She sent a text, Leo has a fever. I need to speak with you. Urgently. She waited 10 minutes, pacing the living room with Leo in her arms, trying to soothe him. He moaned quietly, his body growing heavier. Another temperature check. Still climbing. She dialed again. Voicemail. She stared at the screen, debating. Then made her decision. She couldn't wait. She gathered Leo's things with one hand, bundled him in a soft blanket, and headed for her car. The hospital was 20 minutes away. Every stoplight, every delay felt like an eternity. Leo whimpered once, then grew silent. The silence was worse. At the hospital, the nurses moved quickly once they saw him. Fever of 104. Slight dehydration. Immediate fluids. Emily answered questions rapidly, explaining she was a temporary caregiver, that the father was unreachable, that the baby had no known allergies. They admitted Leo for observation. The pediatrician was calm but firm. In time. She said. You brought him in just. Emily sat beside the hospital crib, holding Leo's tiny hand while he received fluids through a thin tube in his arm. He looked up at her, glassy-eyed, and whimpered. She whispered to him again. The same songs, the same comfort. 90 minutes passed before the door burst open. Nathaniel Blake stood in the doorway, breath uneven, hair disheveled, phone still in hand. His eyes locked on Leo, then flicked to Emily. He stepped forward, speaking low but sharp. What the hell happened? Emily stood up, her voice calm but edged with steel. I tried to call you 3 times. You didn't answer. I was in a conference. He had a fever of 104. I waited as long as I could. Then I made a decision. You took him without telling me. He needed help. He wasn't responding. I wasn't going to wait while you finished a meeting. Nate stared at her, anger barely contained. But beneath it was something else, fear. It flickered in his eyes as he looked at Leo, watched the 4 drip slowly into his son's arm. Emily continued, her voice lowering. He needs more than schedules and structure. He needs someone who sees him. Who hears him when he's in pain. Nate clenched his jaw. I do everything I can. No, you don't. Her tone sharpened. You do what you know. What you've been taught. Business. Precision. Control. But children aren't software. You can't optimize a baby. Silence fell. Nate looked at Leo again. The boy stirred, a soft sound escaping his lips. Nate's shoulders slumped slightly. I didn't know it was this bad. He muttered. Because you weren't there to see it. He sat down slowly, his gaze never leaving Leo. The fire in his eyes dimmed into something quieter. Emily watched him. His face looked different in this light. Not polished, not guarded. Just human. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted. Emily softened, just slightly. Needs presence. No one does. Not completely. But he doesn't need perfection. They sat in silence for a long while, the hum of machines and distant hallway voices the only sounds. A nurse entered quietly to check Leo's vitals. She smiled gently at Emily, then glanced at Nate. With a nod before exiting again. Nate leaned back in the chair, running a hand through his hair. The tension in his posture ebbed, and for the first time, he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Emily stood. I'll give you a moment alone with him. He didn't stop her. She stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall, arms folded across her chest. Her heart was still racing. She hadn't planned to confront him. But she had spoken what needed to be said. Through the glass, she saw Nate reach for his son's hand. He touched it gently, as if afraid he might break it. Leo stirred, and Nate leaned closer, whispering something Emily couldn't hear. It was a start. Later, when the doctors confirmed Leo was stable and could return home the next day, Nate approached Emily as she sat in the waiting room with a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. Thank you, he said quietly. You didn't have to stay. Yes, I did. He nodded once, then looked away, struggling with something. Not since, not really. I don't think I've really seen him. Emily didn't push. She simply said. You can start now. He looked back at her, searching for something in her face. She didn't flinch. When they returned to the mansion the next morning, the silence was still there. But now, it had been broken. The house was quiet again, but it was not the same silence. It had changed. The stillness no longer carried only distance and routine, it now bore the echo of something else, hesitation. Maybe reflection. When Emily returned that morning, Leo already home and napping peacefully. She noticed a shift in the energy of the place. The air didn't feel quite as sterile. The tension that had once clung to every polished surface now seemed to wait in doorways, restless but fading. She began her routine in the kitchen, wiping counters and sorting through unopened mail on the island. Her mind was still at the hospital, the weight of Leo's hand in hers, the pale color of his face, the fragile line between urgency and panic. But she also remembered the way Nate had looked at his son, as though truly seeing him for the first time. It was almost noon when she heard the soft pad of bare feet behind her. I don't think I've ever thanked you properly, Nate said. She turned, surprised. He stood there in jeans and a plain t-shirt, barefoot, hair unkempt. There was no laptop in his hand, no phone pressed to his ear, no barrier of distraction. Just a man. Raw and without armor. I wasn't expecting thanks, she said gently. Still, he replied, rubbing the back of his neck. You could have walked away. Most people would. Emily didn't answer right away. She dried her hands on a towel, then leaned slightly against the counter. He didn't have anyone else. Nate nodded, looking down for a moment. Then, slowly, he moved to the living room where Leo's toys were arranged neatly in a basket by the window. He sat on the floor and pulled out a small plush elephant. His movements were awkward, deliberate. He looked up at her, unsure. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you connect?" Emily walked over and knelt across from him. "Hard. Especially when it's hard. You just show up. Every day. Even when it's—" Leo's voice called from upstairs, an impatient babble. Nate stood immediately, uncertain but determined. "I'll get him." Emily remained where she was, listening. Moments later, Nate returned with Leo in his arms. The baby's eyes lit up when he saw her, but he didn't reach out like usual. Instead, he looked curiously between them. Nate lowered himself. Back to the floor, sitting cross-legged, Leo balanced clumsily on his lap. The child squirmed. Then settled. Emily watched, quiet. Nate tried handing Leo the elephant. The baby took it, then dropped it immediately. Nate picked it up again, offering it with a slight smile. This time, Leo took it and held on. It was nothing. And it was everything. They sat together for nearly an hour. Nate asked questions, how to soothe him when he fussed, what time he usually napped, what his signals meant. Emily answered with simple clarity, offering not instructions but observations. And Nate listened. Really listened. Later that afternoon, while Leo napped again, Emily resumed her cleaning. She moved into the sunroom, a space that had once seemed ornamental but now felt full of possibility. As she scrubbed the windows, she caught sight of Nate outside on the back lawn, pacing with his phone. But instead of facing away from the house, he had positioned himself near the sliding doors, where he could see in. Where he could be near. She watched him through the glass, how he paused, looked back toward the nursery windows. Then resumed speaking with a softer tone than she'd ever heard from him. He looked like a man trying. By evening, something had shifted further. At dinner, Nate asked her to stay. He had food brought in, nothing extravagant, just simple meals from a nearby restaurant. They ate at the large dining table, which until then had served only as a symbol of unused grandeur. Leo sat between them in a high chair. He laughed when Emily made silly faces and giggled when Nate tried to mimic them, clumsily but sincerely. At one point, the baby flung a spoon to the floor, and both adults leaned down at the same time, bumping heads. They laughed, a sound so foreign in that space, it startled them both. After dinner, Nate offered to help with bath time. Emily hesitated, then handed him the towel and stood back. She watched as he kneeled beside the tub, gently pouring warm water over Leo's shoulders, unsure of the rhythm but learning. Leo splashed, delighted, and Nate's laughter, soft, real, filled the room. She had never seen him like this. Not in photos, not in moments stolen through doorways. He wasn't just a man in control anymore. He was a father, unraveling the script and writing a new one in real time. That night, before she left, Emily lingered at the front door. Nate walked her out, carrying Leo on his hip, the baby already drowsy. "I know I've made mistakes," he said quietly. "We all have," Emily replied. "But I'm trying to be better." She met his eyes, and for the first time, there was no wall between them. "That's what matters." He nodded. "I don't want to do this alone. Not anymore." She didn't ask what he meant by this. He didn't specify. But the meaning was clear enough. As she stepped out into the cool night, Emily turned back once and saw them standing in the doorway, father and son, side by side. A picture of imperfection, of effort, of something just beginning. The man in the suit was still there. But now, he was kneeling on the floor, getting splashed by bath water, holding a spoon offered by chubby fingers, learning the rhythm of laughter again. He was discovering what no title or fortune could teach. And Leo was no longer crying. The knock on the door came just after 10 o'clock in the morning, a sharp rhythm that startled Emily from her usual routine. She had been in the kitchen, gently bouncing Leo on her hip while checking the fridge for his next meal. Nate was upstairs, working remotely from the rarely used guest study, having opted to stay close after the previous week's changes. The new rhythm of the house had begun to settle, still delicate, still evolving, but undeniably warmer. Emily wiped her hands and opened the door, expecting a delivery or perhaps one of Nate's assistants. Instead, a tall man stood on the doorstep, dressed in a crisp blazer and dark jeans. Sunglasses perched on his forehead, an amused smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Let me guess," he said, eyes flicking to Leo. "You're not the nanny. Or are you?" Emily blinked. "Can I help you?" "Andrew Blake." The man replied, extending his hand. "Brother." Nate's older, significantly more charming. Emily hesitated, then shook his hand. "He's working upstairs. Do you want to come in?" "Always. I love a good surprise." Andrew stepped inside like he owned the place, looking around with mild curiosity. "Still cold in here?" he remarked, running a hand over the nearest shelf. "At least the furniture hasn't changed." Nate always had a taste for things that looked like they came out of a catalog called Emotionally Unavailable. Emily said nothing. Leo stared at Andrew with a curious frown. "Who's the little guy?" Andrew asked, peeking closer. "This him?" "This is Leo," Emily said, holding him a little closer. Andrew nodded, his smile softening. "He's got Clara's eyes." The name landed like a quiet drop of water in a still room. Nate entered moments later, his footsteps firm. "Andrew." "Nathaniel." Andrew replied, turning with open arms. "Don't get up. What are you doing here?" Andrew dropped his arms and shrugged. "Felt like seeing my brother. And my nephew. Been a while. You could have called. And missed the look on your face when you saw me standing here unannounced. Please." Emily took a step back. "I'll let you two catch up." She moved toward the nursery, but Andrew's voice stopped her. "Wait. You're not just the cleaner, are you? You're the one who got Leo to stop crying." Emily froze. Nate stepped in. "She's helping." "It's complicated." "Helping?" Andrew echoed, tilting his head. "She's doing more parenting than you ever have." "Enough," Nate said sharply. Andrew held up his hands. "Just saying what everyone else is thinking." Emily left then, slipping out of the room with Leo. She returned to the nursery and closed the door, gently setting the baby down in his playpen. Her chest felt tight. Andrew's presence was like a stone dropped into a carefully calm pool. From down the hall, voices rose. Not shouting, but strained. Nate's tone was sharp, defensive. Andrew's was lighter, but edged with a tension that suggested this wasn't their first collision. Emily couldn't make out every word, but Clara's name came up more than once. When the voices finally quieted, Emily found herself pacing. Leo was quiet now, playing with his fingers, occasionally glancing toward her as if sensing her unease. She sat beside him, trying to settle herself. It wasn't her family. It wasn't her place. But something about the way Andrew had said Clara's name stirred too much beneath the surface. A few minutes later, Nate appeared at the door. His face was pale, mouth tight. "He'll be here for lunch." Emily nodded. "Do you want me to stay out of the way?" "No," he said, almost too quickly. "No, I want you there." Lunch was quiet at first. The dining table, usually large and echoing, now felt almost intimate. With 3 adults and 1 small child. Andrew played with Leo, making exaggerated faces that drew out reluctant giggles. Nate mostly watched, speaking in clipped responses to his brothers' casual remarks. Halfway through the meal, Andrew leaned back, watching the interaction between Emily and Leo. "You know, I don't think I've seen this house this alive in, ever," he said. "Kept it sealed up like a fortress." Clara tried, but Nate looked up, jaw clenched. "You don't get to talk about her like that," he said quietly. "Why not?" Andrew asked. "She was my friend too. She was my wife. And look what you did with that." The room fell silent. Emily looked down, unsure whether to speak. Leo babbled softly, chewing on a piece of fruit. With innocent detachment. Nate's hands were clenched on the table. "I didn't know how to handle losing her." "I know," Andrew said, his voice finally softening. "But burying her memory along with her? Pretending Leo didn't need anyone because you didn't want to need anyone? That's not handling it. That's hiding." "I'm trying now." Andrew nodded. "I can see that. But don't just try for Leo. Try for yourself." The rest of the meal passed in quiet. When Andrew stood to leave, he ruffled Leo's hair and looked back at Emily. "You're doing more than you signed up for." "Thank you." She gave a small nod, uncertain how to respond. After Andrew left, Nate stood by the window for a long time, arms folded, eyes distant. Emily cleaned the table, working around the quiet, waiting. "I almost broke," he said finally. She turned. "Today?" "No. Then. After Clara. I kept moving, but I wasn't really living. Just existing." Emily stepped closer but said nothing. "I didn't want anyone to see me like that. Especially Leo. I thought if I kept things perfect, he wouldn't notice." "He noticed." Nate nodded slowly. "I know." She didn't speak again. He didn't ask for comfort. But as they stood in the dim light of the late afternoon, the silence between them was no longer empty. It was shared. It had been 3 days since Andrew's visit, but the weight of his words still lingered in the air. Nate was quieter, more introspective, though he made a point of spending time with Leo each day. The boy, in turn, had become more animated around his father, still hesitant, but clearly curious. There were moments, now, when Leo reached for Nate without prompting. And moments when Nate responded without instruction, instinct beginning to edge its way past formality. Emily noticed everything. She said little, but her presence had become a kind of anchor. She moved through the mansion like someone who belonged, not because she had been invited to, but because the space itself had adjusted around her. She could sense the difference in Leo's gaze, in Nate's expressions, even in the silence that now carried warmth rather than tension. On a gray afternoon, with Leo down for his nap and Nate buried in work, Emily found herself cleaning the guest room again, the same one where she had once found Clara's name scrawled on a folded receipt. This time, she took her time. The room, untouched by visitors for months, carried a stillness that didn't feel entirely empty. As she dusted the high shelves, her fingers brushed against a loose panel near the base of a built-in cabinet. She paused, crouched down, and nudged it gently. It shifted. Behind it, tucked in a shallow cavity, was a small wooden box. She hesitated, then pulled it out. It was unmarked, simple, its edges worn. She opened it carefully. Inside were several notebooks, soft-covered, each one bearing faint handwriting on the front. They were labeled only with dates. The most recent one ended a week before Leo's birth. Emily's fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the top one. The first page was a letter. The handwriting was clean, looping, unmistakably feminine. To Nathaniel, if you ever find this. She closed it. For a long time, she sat on the edge of the bed, holding the box in her lap, unsure what to do. These were not hers to read. They were Clara's. They were private. But they had been hidden. Not preserved. Not displayed like treasures, but buried like secrets. Her curiosity, her empathy, her connection to Leo, all of it pressed against her sense of discretion. Finally, she chose one of the older notebooks and opened it near the middle. The words leapt off the page, raw, unfiltered. He won't come to the appointments. He says he's busy, that the numbers don't lie and everything looks fine. But I wish he'd come, just once. I wish he'd put his hand on my belly and feel how much this child moves when I say his name. Emily turned a few pages. I talk to Leo every night now. He kicks when I hum. It makes me feel less alone. I think he knows me already. More entries followed, reflections on motherhood, fear, hope, exhaustion. Clara wrote in a voice that was neither poetic nor dramatic. It was honest. She wrote about Nate too, not in anger, but in longing. She loved him, but she didn't always understand him. She worried that he had closed himself off so deeply, he wouldn't be able to open back up, not even for their son. At the bottom of one page, Clara had written, "If something ever happens to me, I hope he learns how to hold Leo. Not just physically. I mean, really hold him, with presence, with his whole self." Emily closed the notebook. She didn't read any more that day. She returned the journals to the box, placed the box back in the hidden space, and replaced the panel. But she kept one page, a loose letter, folded inside the most recent notebook. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but the words were unmistakably for Nate. That evening, after her cleaning was done and Leo had gone to sleep, she walked quietly into Nate's study. He was at his desk, rubbing his eyes, weariness carved deep into his features. She didn't speak. She simply placed the letter on the desk and walked out. She didn't see his reaction. She didn't wait for an explanation. But the next morning, everything was different. Nate came downstairs with Leo in his arms. He was already dressed, alert, focused, but softer than usual. He slept through the night. He said, almost shyly. Cried. I checked on him 3 times, but he never. Emily nodded. He's starting to feel safe. Nate looked at her, and for a moment, his eyes were wet. He didn't mention the letter. But he didn't need to. Later that day, Emily caught him sitting in the nursery alone, holding another of the journals in his lap. He didn't hide it. He didn't speak. He just sat with it, hands steady, gaze unreadable. For the first time, Clara's presence filled the room. Not as a ghost, but as a thread, woven now into the life Leo was beginning to live. Nate began speaking to Leo more, simple things, soft tones. He started telling him what day it was, what birds were outside the window, what kind of food he would try next. Small, clumsy conversations. But they mattered. Emily watched as Nate took steps, not grand gestures, but real ones. He learned how to change a diaper without fumbling. He learned that Leo liked to be sung to while being dried after a bath. He stopped checking his phone during those moments. And each night, before bed, he sat beside Leo's crib and read aloud. From Clara's journals. Not the painful parts. Just the pieces about her dreams for him. About the hope she had. Emily never asked what he felt reading them. She didn't intrude. But she knew this, the silence that had once dominated the house had been broken, not by noise, but by memory. By voice. By a mother's words reaching through time to remind a father of what was still possible. And Nate, slowly, steadily, was beginning to listen. The atmosphere in the Blake mansion had changed. Not all at once, but with a kind of quiet persistence, like winter yielding to spring. The rooms were no longer just clean, they were lived in. Toys that once stayed tucked neatly in baskets now lay scattered across rugs and ottomans. Soft baby books appeared on side tables. A bottle left half full sat on the kitchen counter, waiting to be washed. The house had begun to breathe. Emily noticed the difference not only in the surroundings but in the people themselves. Leo laughed more, cried less. His smiles came quicker, brighter. He responded to Nate's voice, even when it came from another room. And Nate, for his part, seemed lighter. Not carefree, he would never be that, but present, in a way that softened his sharp edges. One evening, after she'd finished tidying the kitchen, Emily found Nate in the nursery. The lights were dim, and Leo was already drifting into sleep. Nate was seated in the rocking chair, a soft blanket draped over one shoulder, one hand resting on Leo's small chest. Emily leaned against the doorway quietly. "He asked for you today," Nate said, without looking up. Emily smiled faintly. "He doesn't talk yet." He pointed to the stairs and said, "Ma. He says that about the lamp, too." Nate chuckled softly. "Still. I knew what he meant." She stepped inside. "How was he?" "Good. I managed to get him to eat all his peas, which I think qualifies as a miracle." Emily laughed, then sat in the chair across from him. "I've been thinking," Nate said after a moment. "About everything." She waited. "You've done more than take care of him. You've been here. With him. With me. It's my job." "No, it's not. It was never in the contract." He shifted slightly, adjusting Leo's blanket, brushing a strand of hair from the baby's forehead. "I want to ask something of you," he continued. "When you started. And I know it's not part of what you agreed to." Emily's breath caught. "I want you to spend more time here. With him. Not just when I'm working. Not just when I'm away. I want us to do this, together." She stared at him. "You mean, you want me to be here when you're with him?" "Yes." "Nate, that's not a small ask." "I know." There was no awkwardness in his tone, only honesty. "I don't know what I'm doing most days," he said. "I read the journals. I listen. But it still feels like I'm trying to build something without knowing what it's supposed to look like. And when you're here, things feel better." Emily looked down at her hands. "What are you asking me to be, Nate?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm not asking you to be anything you're not ready to be. I'm just asking you to help me be something I've never been. A father who doesn't do this alone." She looked at him then. Really looked. The man who once never left his office, who wouldn't hold his own son, now sat rocking that child to sleep, unsure and vulnerable but undeniably trying. "I'll help," she said. "But only if we're clear. I'm here for him. Always. But I can't blur the lines. I wouldn't ask you to." She nodded. "Then yes. I'll stay longer. I'll help you find your rhythm." Over the next weeks, their days became fuller, more fluid. Emily began arriving earlier, staying later. She helped Nate learn how to manage Leo's tantrums and praised him when he managed to calm the boy without retreating into frustration. They shared mealtimes. They took Leo to the park, where he watched other children with fascination. Nate even pushed him on the swing. Awkward at first, then with growing confidence. There were still hard days. Days when Leo was inconsolable or when Nate's temper flared from exhaustion. But those moments were no longer endured in isolation. They were shared, carried between the two of them. One evening, after Leo had fallen asleep, they sat on the back patio, sharing a quiet drink. The air was cool, and the stars overhead flickered faintly above the Los Angeles skyline. "I keep thinking about what Clara would have done," Nate said. Emily looked at him, but said nothing. She left behind all those words, all those hopes. "I ignored them for so long. But now I can hear her. I think she knew this house would fall apart without someone like you in it. I'm not her. I know. But Leo doesn't need you to be her. He just needs you. The way you look at him. The way you listen." Emily hesitated. "I'm afraid." "Of what?" "That I'm getting too close. That I won't be able to walk away." Nate looked down at his glass. "I don't want you to walk away. But I also won't trap you here." They sat in silence after that, listening to the wind move through the hedges. Somewhere inside, Leo turned in his crib. Emily knew the truth in that moment, whatever name she gave it, whatever boundaries they set, she had already become part of this story. She had stepped beyond the role she was hired to fill. And while the future remained uncertain, her heart was no longer untouched. She would stay. For now. For as long as Leo needed. And perhaps, she thought, as long as Nate did too. The offer came on a Wednesday afternoon, slipped into Emily's inbox with the subject line: "Career opportunity, immediate response requested." At first, she almost deleted it, assuming it was spam. But something about the sender caught her eye. Marla Jennings, the head of hospitality at the 5-star Eloan Grand Hotel downtown, a place she had only dared to dream about in passing. She opened the email with cautious curiosity. The message was short and direct. The hotel had reviewed her prior experience through the agency and heard glowing things from past clients. They were offering her a full-time position with benefits, competitive salary, and the possibility of long-term advancement. Stability. Security. Something she hadn't had in years. She stared at the screen for a long time. By the time she logged out, the sun had shifted through the windows of the Blake mansion, casting long shadows across the floor. Leo was napping upstairs, and Nate was in the nursery. With him, now a familiar sight that no longer surprised her. The house had become a rhythm she could follow with her eyes closed, the way Leo curled his toes when he was content, the way Nate leaned against the counter when he was uncertain but wanted to appear composed. And yet, the words from the email echoed in her mind like a quiet knock: stability, advancement, future. Emily didn't bring it up right away. Instead, she moved through the rest of the day in a careful dance of routine and reflection. She bathed Leo, let him splash water onto her shirt without complaint. She watched as Nate sat cross-legged on the floor reading a picture book, stumbling over silly rhymes with unfiltered amusement. She saw, with painful clarity, the world she had built herself into. The next morning, she arrived as usual, but with a weight behind her steps. As she entered the kitchen, Nate was already making coffee, badly, but earnestly. He smiled when he saw her, holding up the carafe like a peace offering. "Still trying to get the ratio right," he said. Emily smiled faintly. "It smells better today." He chuckled. Progress. They shared the first few hours quietly. Leo was cheerful, bouncing between them with a joy that needed no explanation. Emily watched Nate lift him high above his head, the baby's laughter echoing down the hallway. The sight made her heart ache. By noon, she couldn't hold it in anymore. "I need to talk to you," she said as they sat at the kitchen table, Leo babbling over soft mashed banana. Nate looked up. "Everything okay?" She nodded slowly. "I got a job offer." His face stilled. "It's from a hotel downtown. Full-time. Benefits. Good pay." For a moment, he said nothing. Then, carefully, "And you're thinking of taking it?" "I'm not sure. I haven't decided. But I need to." He nodded, gaze fixed on the wood grain of the table. "Of course. It's the kind of opportunity one haven't had in a long time." "I understand." The silence that followed was long, but not cold. It was the kind of silence that understood. "Wait." That honored it. "Leo's going to miss you," Nate said quietly. Emily exhaled. "I'll miss him more than I know how to say." Nate looked at her then. Not with anger or disappointment, but something closer to grief. "You've changed this place. You've changed me." She didn't respond right away. Her throat tightened. "I didn't mean to," she finally said. "I just showed up." "That was enough," he replied. Later that day, she told Leo goodbye before her shift ended, even though it wasn't final. She crouched beside him on the rug, running a hand through his fine hair. He smiled at her with sleepy eyes, reaching out clumsily, pulling on her sleeve. She held his tiny hand for just a moment longer than usual. When she stood, Nate was waiting by the door. "Are you leaving for good?" he asked, softly. "I don't know yet." He nodded once. "If you do, I won't stop you." "I know. But I might ask you to come back." That night, Emily walked through her apartment like a stranger. Her sister Jenna was out, working late, and the space felt smaller than she remembered. The job offer sat open on her laptop screen, blinking. She read it again, but the words felt less real now than they had hours earlier. In the quiet, she realized something profound. She had not only found meaning inside the mansion, she had left a mark on it, too. Not with decoration or renovation, but with care. With presence. With love, however silent and unspoken. The next morning, she called the hotel and asked for more time. They agreed to give her until the end of the week. By Friday, she still hadn't decided. But Leo had. That afternoon, when she walked into the nursery after a short break, Leo saw her and began to cry, not the fussy whine of boredom, but something deeper, more distressed. He reached for her with both arms, his face crumpled, tears rolling down in slow, shuddering trails. She lifted him quickly, rocking him gently. And in that moment, something inside her broke. Not from pain, but from knowing. He needed her. Still. She kissed his forehead, whispering into his soft curls. "I haven't gone yet." But she knew it would not be enough forever. Something would have to change. Either she would have to stay, truly stay, or they would have to learn to say goodbye. That evening, she told Nate. I haven't accepted the job. Not yet. He looked up from where he was placing Leo into the crib. Why not? Because I can't figure out how to leave without feeling like I'm walking away from something real. Nate watched her, his expression unreadable. Maybe that's because it is real. And for once, there was no more to say. The decision came not with fireworks or declarations, but with footsteps echoing across polished marble floors. Nate Blake walked through the lobby of the Eloan Grand Hotel on a crisp Saturday morning, his step steady but unhurried. He wore no suit, no tie, just a soft gray sweater and the kind of expression that told of a man who had learned not to hide behind his own armor. The concierge gave him a polite smile, but he barely noticed. He asked for Emily Carter and was directed toward the staff wing without hesitation. She was in the break room when he found her, standing near a window with a paper cup of coffee in hand, staring at the skyline beyond. The moment she turned and saw him, her breath caught. She didn't expect him here. She hadn't even told him she'd accepted the first week of the hotel contract as a trial. But he had known. Of course he had. I hope this isn't crossing a line, he said quietly. Emily set the cup down. You came all the way here. I had to see you. I had to say something. He stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets. No rehearsed speech. No grand gesture. Just a man choosing not to disappear. I'm not asking you to come back for me, he began. That wouldn't be fair. And it wouldn't be right. She listened, eyes steady. But I am asking you to think about Leo. Because he asks for you every day. He points to the door. He waits. And I tell him you're working, but I see it in his eyes. He doesn't understand why. The person who made the world feel safe suddenly isn't there. Emily looked down. You've done well without me. I've seen it. You've changed. I had to. He replied. But I didn't do it alone. He stepped closer, voice quieter now. You didn't just help him sleep. You helped me wake up. To all the things I had ignored, pushed away, buried. Clara. Leo. Myself. I was trying to build a life out of silence, and you walked in and filled the space with something real. She didn't respond right away. The air between them was heavy with truth. I read the rest of the journals, he said. There was a line Clara wrote. Don't let the world make you forget that love is not a transaction. It's presence. It's staying when it's easier to go. Emily swallowed hard. She was wise. She would have liked you. I think I would have liked her too. Nate's voice wavered slightly. Leo needs a home that feels whole. I'm trying to give him that. But I can't do it pretending you never mattered. Emily looked at him, heart pounding. What are you asking me to do? He shook his head. I'm not asking. I'm offering. A place. Not a job. A role. A presence. However you define it. But real. Not just filling in the cracks. She stepped toward him. You really think I belong there? I don't just think it. I know it. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Emily exhaled slowly. I can't come back as the cleaner. I can't pretend I'm only there for dust and bottles and polite nods. Good. He said. Because that's not what I need you to be. What do you need me to be? He didn't answer with words. He simply looked at her, really looked, and she saw the truth. There. Not desperation. Not manipulation. Just openness. Just hope. Later that afternoon, Emily returned to her apartment. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the small suitcase she had yet to unpack from her first hotel shift. Her sister, Jenna, came in and leaned on the doorframe. "He came to see you, didn't he?" Jenna asked. Emily nodded. "And? I think I'm going back." Jenna stepped forward, kneeling beside the bed. "You love that little boy." Emily nodded again, her eyes misting. "I didn't mean to. But I do." "What about Nate?" "I don't know yet. But I know this, what we built there wasn't an accident." Jenna smiled. "Then don't let it become a regret." The next morning, Emily stood at the gate of the Blake mansion. She didn't have a key. She didn't need one. The gate buzzed open as if expecting her. Inside, Nate was in the foyer, Leo in his arms. The boy's eyes lit up at the sight of her, arms shooting forward with glee. Nate handed him over with a quiet smile. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't either," Emily replied. Leo clung to her, burying his face in her neck. She held him tightly, inhaling the scent of baby shampoo and something warmer, something that felt like home. Nate stepped back. "There's no schedule this time. No expectations. Just, stay if it feels right." She looked at him, her voice soft but certain. "It feels right." That day passed not in ceremony, but in simplicity. They fed Leo together. They played on the floor. Nate read aloud while Emily cleaned up dishes she hadn't dirted. It was natural. It was quiet. It was whole. That night, before she left, Nate walked her to the door. "Whatever we become," he said, "thank you for showing me how to begin." She reached up, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You did that yourself," she said. "I just left the light on." Then she stepped outside. But this time, she knew she'd be back. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the sheer curtains of the Blake mansion, casting golden lines across the nursery floor. Leo lay sprawled on a blanket, one fist curled around a stuffed elephant, the other reaching toward the light as it danced on the wall. His laughter came in short, delighted bursts, echoing down the hallway like music. Emily was in the kitchen, humming quietly as she prepared breakfast. Her movements were instinctive now. She knew which pan to use, where Leo's cereal was kept, how many slices of toast Nate liked and how he took his coffee. The house, once cavernous and cold, now held the rhythm of lived-in mornings. There were marks on the refrigerator where Leo had placed stickers, blankets draped over couches from late-night feedings, and handwritten notes left by Nate on the kitchen counter, small things, but together, they formed something greater than routine. It had been nearly a month since she returned. Not as an employee. Not as a guest. But as something else entirely. Nate appeared in the hallway just after 7 o'clock in the morning, hair slightly tousled, a sleepy smile on his face. He paused when he saw Emily standing barefoot near the stove, one hand balancing a mug of coffee, the other flipping a pancake for Leo. "You're getting good at that," he said, his voice still gravelly with sleep. "Practice makes perfect," she replied without turning. He stepped closer, reaching over to grab the second mug she had already filled for him. Their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. Leo's voice rose from the nursery, calling for someone, not clearly, but with the same certainty that a child has when they know someone will come. "I've got him," Nate said, and disappeared down the hall. Emily listened to the way he spoke to his son now, easy, natural, without hesitation. She thought back to the first time she had heard Leo cry alone upstairs, back when Nate didn't know how to hold him, back when the silence of the house felt impenetrable. That world was gone. Now, a new one had taken its place. They ate together in the dining room, Leo perched in his high chair between them. He smeared banana across his tray and squealed when Emily tried to clean his face with a napkin. Nate laughed, shaking his head. He gets that stubbornness from Clara. Emily smiled. And the charm? Nate looked at her. That's still being decided. The day passed in the gentle rhythm they had grown into. After breakfast, they took Leo to the park. Nate carried him on his shoulders, pointing out birds and clouds, while Emily pushed him. Empty stroller with snacks and a bottle tucked neatly inside. Other parents smiled as they passed, some offering knowing glances, assuming them to be a couple. Neither corrected the assumption. Back home, Emily laid Leo down for his nap while Nate went through a few work emails. But he didn't disappear into his office like he used to. He stayed nearby, sitting in the sunroom with his laptop, glancing often toward the hallway that led to the nursery. Later that evening, Emily stood on the back patio, the breeze brushing her hair gently across her face. She watched the garden sway, remembered the first time she had seen it, trimmed, lifeless, ornamental. Now it bloomed with color. Nate had hired a gardener, but he also spent weekends out there with Leo, planting small flowers with chubby hands and muddy shoes. You still think this isn't real? Nate asked from behind her. Emily turned. Sometimes I still feel like I'll wake up and it'll all be gone. It won't. He stepped beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. This isn't a story someone else is writing anymore. He continued. It's ours now. Emily looked at him, eyes searching his face. What are we, Nate? He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. They stood like that, in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Inside, Leo stirred in his crib. Emily moved first, but Nate stopped her gently. Let me. She watched him go, listened to the creak of the floorboards as he reached the nursery. His voice came softly through the baby monitor, a lullaby off-key, familiar, warm. She stayed on the patio, heart full, thoughts quiet. Weeks later, a friend asked her what had changed. Everything, she said. But really, it had all begun with a simple truth. She had walked into a house to clean, and found a place that needed more than polished floors. She found a child who needed to be seen, a man who needed to be forgiven, and a silence that needed to be broken. In return, they had offered her something unexpected. Not perfection, but family. And for Emily Carter, that was enough.